Before the Rings of Power, there were the Silmarils. Before Sauron, there was his master Morgoth. Before Aragorn and Arwen, there was Beren and Luthien. Join us as we explore Tolkien and all the ages of Middle-earth with your hosts from theonering.com, Jonathan Watson, Michael Grumbine, and Dan Coates.
Hey everybody, if you're listening to this, I am so sorry that you don't see the image on your screen. It is linked in the show notes below.
Oh, that's awesome. I'm really glad, Jonathan, you did not show us that beforehand and just started with that on the screen. That is fantastic.
So it is a
The reactions are genuine, folks.
It's an animated image that artist Richard, one of our members, put together and posted in Discord of three rocks floating, struggling to stay awake by their eyes cast high in the sky, and one poor rock who's looking down with his trying to hold his breath in, and the last rock above him who's still looking up says, "No, Dwayne, look up. And it's just so perfect, and I had to share it because, man, this is better than any of the other
awesome
stuff. This is where AI art can never compete with something this awesome. I'll link it in the show notes below so that everybody can look at it. But it is superlative. It is great. I love it. So thanks to artist Richard for that one, and thank you for joining us. We are into the second episode into the Akallabêth, and man, that means we only have second and final, and we only have theoretically, unless we're going to go 3 hours, and I'm going to be forced to cut it in half. It is likely. Well, Dan does have something to go to tonight. So
I do have things to do. Yeah.
Yeah, you have a cigar to pick out, and we will let you do that.
Yeah.
But what you saw there, the poor Dwayne sinking to the bottom of the ocean because he kept looking down, which of course is a reference to the Rings of Power in the Second Age, which is where we are in the Akallabêth, where Finrod says to Galadriel, "Do you know the difference between a ship and a rock? Well, rocks look down and ships look up, and that's where they float." So anyway, thank you, artist Richard. He is one of the members that joined us in our private Discord. He gets the extended podcast, which is about 15 to 30 minutes longer, depending on how forgiving we are of our time. And yeah, it's $4 a month. First month is free. Just go to theonering.com/member and sign up and join us. It's a lot of fun. And we're doing let's see, actually, by the time we record this, we will have had our monthly live stream the Saturday before. So I apologize, but we
Did you just say monthly live stream?
I probably did. Live stream. It's not a live stream. It's it's an actual live chat with all the members of Discord. There's no lording it down from somebody who can stream and everybody else has to just type. So we're all together in this, and we'll have had our first. Tomorrow night is our first book club. We're reading Taliesin by Merlin. Taliesin by Stephen R. Lawhead, which I read the first 2 chapters and I realized, I forgot how actually he's an effective writer. He's better than many of the others that I've read recently. And he's not, he says what he means and he doesn't go into too much flowery detail like you might with a Robert Jordan to set the stage. He tends to keep going, and I enjoy that. So anyway, join us in our Discord by going to theonering.com/member, and you can get us into our book club. You can get into our monthly video chats, and get the extended podcast every week too. But this week we do have an all that is gold, because
all that is gold does not glitter.
It's our 1-year anniversary on the 18th of May. That's when we released our very first podcast 1 year ago.
Did it.
So our next episode, did we get 52 episodes? Probably 51, because I think we took a 1-week break once around the 4th of July. I didn't.
Sad patriotism.
I don't think. It's quality, not quantity. So anyway, next week, our episode is going to be asking each other the confessions from the comfy chair, which are usually only for our members when we do interviews. We've done a few, with Austin Freeman and with, I guess Steve. We didn't ask Steve those questions. We're going to have to do that. Steve from Glasshammer, who's on our almost weekly live streams. But yeah, we asked him, our 10 important questions. We'll ask each other them. And if you're a member, please ask those additional questions. If you have any other questions for us, anything else you want to query, of us and how we approach Tolkien, or just in general. You know, what's my favorite kind of pizza? You can ask that too, and we'll throw it in there. And if you have any questions in YouTube or anywhere else, you can DM me on Twitter at Torque, T-O-R-C, and ask questions there too, and we'll try and throw them in, just make it a fun sort of get to know you kind of session. But I'm sure some of those confessions from the comfy chair will be enough for some.
And we are not monsters. Our favorite pizza does not have pineapple on it.
Correct.
Yes, although I'm not against
Oh, no.
but it's not my favorite.
I have to rage quit this podcast.
All right, I'll just go ahead and mute you, Michael. All right, perfect. There you go. I did mute him. All right. So we have to get into the second chapter, the second half, the second 2/3. The Akallabêth.
I bet Turin likes pineapple on his pizza.
Turin probably does.
Now I can't answer that question because somebody might need to ask that question. We'll have to answer it next week. Maybe that's the additional question. We're trying to find one more question for our confessions from the comfy chair. Maybe that's the question. Pineapple on pizza, is that allowed? Okay, Dan, we're going to kick it off with you again. So,
Dan's Big Thought.
it's on you.
All right, we finally have religion in Middle Earth. Like we've seen all those articles about, Tolkien. He just kept this very generic. It's just a world that doesn't have any religious themes in it. Tolkien did not inject his Catholicism into Middle Earth, and in this chapter, we definitely see that Tolkien is writing from that perspective of being a Catholic and having that background informing what he's writing. And we see religion come to the island of Númenor. And right away, you have human sacrifice taking place. And you have temples being built to honor Melkor. They're basically devolving into Satanism. And
Wait a minute.
Dark Lord.
Wait a minute. So but there was real religion first, right? That was the corruption.
He's talking about Catholicism, Michael.
He's talking about Catholicism, right?
No.
That's what it sounded like.
I know.
Yeah.
Wow.
So obviously earlier on in, I wasn't meaning it that way at all.
Wow.
So obviously earlier on in the Quintus Silmarillion, we are introduced to the Valar and the Eru as being the creator and the angels, and they're singing creation into existence. And now we finally have the men on the scene, and this is like the first great civilization of men, and they are starting religion now, and they're descending immediately into worshiping the devil and human sacrifice. So I just thought that was interesting that it's almost like right away where Sauron is able to corrupt them. He's able to deceive them. He basically tells them that Eru isn't real. Like they're already devolved so far that they're going into atheism of denying that Eru Iluvatar even exists. And the true Lord is Melkor, and he gives you freedom. Whereas the Valar, they want to enslave you. They're lying to you to trick you to enslave you. And
right.
The one who gives you real freedom is Melkor. And in order for you to get life and get eternal life, let's just start sacrificing these people. So this is a really interesting chapter. It's a really interesting way that Tolkien, he's telling his tale of Atlantis, and he's also weaving in this tale of it's almost like cancel culture. You have like the faithful, you have like the remnant who are being faithful to Eru and the Valar, and you have kind of like just the current of their culture is very much like we need to cancel all those people and worship the devil. So it's pretty amazing.
Right, and it's all under the auspices, or rather the driving theme of Númenor, which is they desire to escape death. That's the thing that they want more than anything. But I also found it fascinating, and it is funny that Tolkien brings in direct religion and then disposes of it in one chapter.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Well, you can't say Tucker Carlson isn't on the internet anymore.
Oh.
Dan's mug is incredible. Wow.
Mhm.
I don't even know what to say. If you've missed
Gotta
it,
support the guy.
Just take a look at Dan's mug.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we're introduced to right religion, where the Númenorians were the first men to worship a hero directly, and they do so. They have a mountain for doing so, and regular and rituals to do so, and then within, I mean, it's a short time period in terms of the reading of it, but it's 20 kings later. It's 23 kings later before they actually dispose of it, and 25 kings later before they turn to the worship of darkness and Melkor, Morgoth, and it was essentially Satan and the child sacrifice. So it does take them a long time, thousands of years, to get there, but they corrupt, and the root of their corruption comes from their overweening desire for eternal life and to escape death. Very interesting.
And that all stems back from what happened at the very beginning of where we started today, which is Sauron's back.
Right.
And I think it's, Sauron is an interesting character because it's like he's not really there. He doesn't want to conquer with armies. I think the word Tolkien used was guile. He knew that in order to change the world, in order to change the hearts of men, right? It wasn't like he would conquer them with arms. He would have to conquer them in another way.
Well, I'm going to take issue with that.
No.
He's perfectly happy conquering with armies, and he does so. He fights a war against the elves. He conquers the men around him. But when the Númenorians come to town in full battle array, he realizes that's not going to work, and he has no problem switching instantly to guile. So to me, it's like the left hand and the right hand. He's happy to use the right hand to crush, but if he can't crush, he's also happy to use cunning, subterfuge, and guile to undermine you.
Well, and I guess it's at this point that he has already lost the battle with with a lot of the elves, right? Is that right? Am I remembering all the dates?
Yeah, because
right?
at this point he's already made the ring.
Yes, right. Yeah, he's made the rings. Yeah.
Right, he's made the rings, and he's made war upon the elves,
right.
But he won most of that war. He was driven back eventually, but
his guile still was what made the rings, right? So his success, all of his success, doesn't really come from military strength. It really comes from him undermining everything, undermining the elves, undermining the men, turning their hearts away from what is good, turning their hearts into the greed.
I don't know. I think the Stones of Eregion would have something to say about that. He laid waste to that land because the elves and the elf smiths were in that land. And
I'm not saying he didn't, but he also I'm not saying he's not like a conquering foe, but what I am saying is that he conquered much through guile.
Yes.
By changing the heart.
Well, his greatest master strokes are through guile. I agree with that.
Yeah.
So both the creation of the One Ring and the domination of others through the rings, that was guile, and then the downfall of Númenor is guile. So his greatest strokes are through guile. But in all the middle terms, in the middle, like he takes over the whole swaths of land of Middle Earth. He's worshipped as a god in the East.
But without guile, he never would have won. Strength of arms would not be enough. Whereas
Correct.
Apparently, with the Númenorians, it was. At least he thought so, just by looking at them and their 4 ships.
Yeah. So, yeah. So you really get a sense reading this how glorious and how powerful the Númenorians were. Like, they show up and he just immediately surrenders. He doesn't put up a single ounce of fight, and it makes me wonder who was more powerful, the Númenorians at their height, or all of the Eldar fighting Morgoth in the First Age.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Because it seems like they show up and Sauron's like, nope, not going to do this. But Sauron had just spent the last 500 years fighting the elves, and he didn't have that response. So it is very interesting to me.
That's true. Do you mean how the elves in the final battle against Morgoth, how in that array of power?
Well, they had Valar with them then, so
yeah. So
yeah, I guess I'm talking about like the battles of Beleriand, where they had the siege on Angband for 500 years or so.
I mean, you got to think like these guys have been sitting for a couple thousand years on their island without anything to hinder them, And
Right.
so everything has been getting better and better and better, and they reach the height of it. And then they reach the height of their glory, but they start on the descent, their moral descent at that point.
I don't want to jump ahead too much or get out of order. I'm not too much of a systematic, like page by page guy on these discussions. But one thing that's interesting to me is that when Ar-Pharazôn, who is the king of Númenor, when they go to Middle Earth and they capture Sauron, when he goes, they are not there as the good guys. They go because Ar-Pharazôn takes umbrage with Sauron for declaring himself king of kings.
King of men.
Or
Yep.
king of men. And Ar-Pharazôn says, nope, that's me.
Yeah, right.
So it's just really interesting to me that this isn't like good versus evil. It's just like, no, I'm coming in and I'm going to be the king of men. So
Right. It's simply his desire for power. It's interesting because there was a scene when right before he decided to do that, where Ar-Pharazôn sitting on his throne, and it says, "And sitting upon his carven throne in the city of Armenelos, in the glory of his power, he brooded darkly, thinking of war. For he had learned in Middle Earth of the strength of the realm of Sauron and of his hatred of Westernness." This reminds me of Morgoth sitting in his throne in Angband, brooding and thinking of war. This is Ar-Pharazôn is now a small shadow of Morgoth, and we see that he becomes a much closer parallel to Morgoth as time goes on, and he becomes, in the words of Tolkien, the greatest tyrant among men that the world had ever seen. So the tale picking up from, I mean, it's not complicated, like Jonathan said. We don't have to go through page by page, but basically the idea is from the 13th. It was the 13th king, I think, 13th or the 11th king. Darn, I should have been more specific. But the 11th or 13th king.
There he is.
There he is.
Ar-Pharazôn, the greatest king, the greatest, most glorious. Oh man.
So I had a funny reaction when I was reading this. I'm like, I'm rereading this for the sixth time now, and I'm looking at him going, so all of the kings of the Númenorians start with R. They take the title R, and they're also the greatest sea masters in the world. So does that mean that they're all pirates? This is where we get the R. Never name yourself R.
Oh, geez, that's so bad, Michael.
They're pirate
oh my
kings,
gosh.
right? They become pirates.
Kings.
Well, by the end, Ar-Pharazôn is he's leaning into the R because he goes and enslaves people on Middle Earth and takes stuff, and he just takes away their wealth and then enslaves them. It sounds like a pirate to me. So there you go. There's the origin of the of the piratical language. Yeah, well, lame dad jokes aside, there's an arc here which is very simple, like Jonathan was saying, where basically we see the Númenorians reach the height of their bliss in the either 11th or 13th king. I can't remember off the top of my head, and they are not happy. They're the happiest they've been. It sounds funny to say they reached the height of their bliss and they're not happy, but there's this one thing that they really, really, really want and really, really, really bothers them. Even, it says, even the faithful are bothered by this, which is death. And so they make a petition. This is the time when ships are still coming out of the west occasionally. And so the Valar actually send messengers to them to answer what is a growing rot or a growing problem inside of Númenorian society after 1,500 years or so. Mm-hmm. And that is this obsession with death and avoiding it. And so they are not happy with the answers of Valar. We read about that last episode,
right?
Last podcast. And so this whole reading, the second half, is the fruit of them not being happy with it. So they're not happy with it. First, they split into the King's Men and the Elendili of the elf friends, and then as time goes on, that becomes more and more hardened. I think you said, Jonathan, or no, Dan said it's like almost like they're canceled. So they cancel the elf friends. They're happy to just let them go off and sail away and never be seen again because they want nothing to do with them ever again. They want them out of their society, and they're all about men. And there's this great line where it says, and I'm paraphrasing, essentially, they no longer loved the Valar, but at least they feared them. And so they didn't break the ban of the Valar yet. It takes a lot more than that to fear them, to break the ban. So they grow in might and power. And of course, the whole arc of this reading is just them growing in power. And then they grow so powerful they can actually conquer Sauron by might of arms, or they could, is the implication. And so Sauron surrenders. And then from then on, what we have, I don't know if you guys saw it too, we have essentially a tale of a sideways tale of Exodus. So you have the great, most powerful king on the earth, and you have him being tempted to think that he's greater than God. And all of these signs start happening. God starts sending, there's the weather changes, and you have these storms that come in with clouds like eagles, and fire under their wings, and lightning starts blowing things up and killing people on a regular basis. And the Númenorians build this evil temple that Sauron is essentially the high priest of, to the satanic worship of human sacrifice and the worship of Morgoth. And that temple gets blown, gets hit by lightning, and what's the verb that keeps popping up at least, by my count, 5 times, might have been more. They kept hardening their heart. Go back to Exodus. Pharaoh keeps hardening his heart. There's these signs and wonders come from God that you're not on the right path, dude. Turn from your path, and he doesn't, and he won't. And then finally, God destroys their civilization at the height of their hubris, and their greatest act of sin, which is to send an army out, just like in Exodus. And so their whole army goes out to invade the land that they wish to take by force, and with water, God destroys them. So I see a tremendous number of parallels with Exodus, and obviously even in more titanic literary terms than Exodus, because there's actual chasm that opens in the ocean and pulls in the whole, breaks the world, not just water like a wall on their right and on their left in the book of Exodus, but this has become an Old Testament tale.
Yeah. I'd never occurred to me as Exodus, because I think the idea that it's Atlantis is so front and center.
It's both, right?
It's both.
Tolkien,
I know it's both.
Tolkien does a lot of things at once.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There's a little bit of an element. I'm not saying it's a direct parallel, but there's an element of the Tower of Babel as well. Like, not saying that the languages get divided, but they are trying to ascend to heaven. They're trying to enter into the blessed land by force, and it gets ripped away from them, and they all get drowned and turned under the rocks. Like I think Tolkien writes they get like buried into the hills as soon as they step foot on the land.
The army itself gets buried under the hills. That's right.
Yeah. So it's just a very powerful image of trying to seize heaven by force of arms.
And then there's even the Moses and God's people element, where the faithful escape from the destruction of that is reserved for the rest of the Númenorians or Egyptian army in the case of Exodus. So the you have the remnant, and they are much diminished, but they survive and survive at the end in a kind of act of some kind of providence, where essentially their ships probably would have been submerged and destroyed along with the entire island of Númenor. One of the few things they actually got right in Rings of Power was the wave wall. There's an actual wave wall. Yep, the vision of Tar Miriel in Rings of Power, and there is no Tar Miriel in Tolkien. There's a Miriel, but she's not a Tar. That wall of water is in fact the ending of Númenor, and it does in fact destroy the island.
Does the prefix tar have a meaning? I know it does for Tolkien, but does tar slash something mean something in Númenorian?
I think it's just the female version of R. Tar versus R.
R and Tar. Okay.
Yeah, it means queen or in
Oh,
this
okay.
case. Yeah. Just like R means king.
Yeah, I was kind of like surprised reading through this for the first time. Miriel is very quickly mentioned and then very quickly gets sidelined. And,
well, yeah, because her husband is her cousin who forces her to marry him.
Right, and then
not a very girl power moment. So Amazon did away with that.
Yeah, so Amazon made a whole season about her, and in the Rings of in Akallabêth, she's like a paragraph, and she's sidelined.
Yeah, and if I was in charge of making the Rings of Power series, I would have expanded her character too. I just would have kept to the text. You would have learned a lot more about her. She was the daughter of the last good king.
And I think Tar Palantir.
Tar Palantir. And oh wait, I'm wrong about the queen thing. Tar is the older form then.
Tar is.
Yep. Thank you, Jonathan.
Oberyn.
Yeah. It's just the older form of ruler. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So it's so Tar Palantir was her father. And he took the elven name Palantir, and it's funny because it's by this time Númenorian society is so corrupt that you have but no one lifts a finger against him because they're scared of him because he has the true gift of prophecy. So I always thought that was an interesting, like, how would that play out politically speaking? Like you can imagine some courtroom scenes where some of the nobility who hate the elves and hate what Tar Palantir has revealed himself to be, which is a member of the faithful, try to rise up against him, and he basically just like predicts their downfall, and then it happens to them, and everyone else is like, whoa, okay, all right, man, just we'll just it's like Homer Simpson, we'll just step back into the bushes here and let you do your thing. And his thing is really sad. Tar Palantir's thing, like he brings back the true worship of God. He tries to appeal to the Valar, and it all just falls on deaf ears, and there's basically because his people have not repented. It's only the king that's repenting, and a small group of people of Númenorians. Then the vengeance was not so easily turned aside. Tolkien said something to that effect. I'm paraphrasing, but
you also with Tar Palantir, he's the one that gives the prophecy about the line of kings will end if the tree dies, the white tree. Is that Tar Palantir, I believe?
Yes.
Reading that was really interesting because that brings a whole dimension to the white tree of Gondor that we read in Lord of the Rings. That when it starts blossoming again, or when they plant the new tree, when Aragorn is crowned king, that like this has been going on for thousands of years. This white tree is being a symbol of the line of the true king being alive. And in this chapter, Sauron cuts it down
and burns it, right?
And burns it. Yeah, as part of the sacrificing to Melkor.
Right.
So I thought that was a great picture of just evil trying to stamp out what's good.
Right, and I love Tolkien's use. He has this ability to walk that fine but lovely line between sort of the pagan rituals with the trees and all the elements of nature and the world that are good in a natural way, but tie them into the supernatural as well. So the trees, the line of white trees is of course a sign of the blessing of the Valar, who are the stewards of the earth. And speaking of that, I'm going to read you a line, and I want all of your reaction about what happens in the money shot of this chapter, which is that the landing of all of the army of the Númenorians on the shores of the Blessed Land. And interestingly, the Valar themselves do not act against the men, right?
Mm-hmm.
So instead, the line is, then Manwë upon the mountain called upon Ilúvatar, and for that time the Valar laid down their government of Arda. Very interesting line. Do you think that it means that essentially, did that laying down of their government of Arda have an effect into the later years after that? Have they failed in a way, and they've had to kick it back to the big guy and let Eru take the helm and do as he wishes?
Yeah,
exactly. I did that on purpose. So but so is it Eru take the helm moment, and now Eru's got, because here's an interesting thought that I had. Gandalf is brought back to life, and it isn't Manwë that brings him back to life. It's Eru that brings him back to life. Iluvatar does. He makes it clear in the quote. We could talk about the specifics at another time. It's an interesting quote, but he makes it clear that he's outside of the circles of Arda. So Manwë doesn't have power outside of Arda. So and Iluvatar. There's other clues as well from the way he talks that it's Iluvatar. So is this giving up of the government? Is this in effect the Valar saying we failed?
So are you asking?
This is something else.
Are you asking from this point forth into the Third Age, have the Valar laid down their government of Arda?
Well, I wouldn't go that far, because it only says for that time the Valar laid down.
So what is your brief question?
So my brief question is: did something change in that moment? Is this? I can see this as a kind of arc where the Valar have been trying to juggle the children of Iluvatar and do their best, and they've utterly failed. It's come. They even did the weather thing and the lightning from the sky, and nothing worked. And the eagles of Manwë came, and the men still came. And the Valar they seem to be saying,
I guess
can't do it anymore. You take it, God.
Yeah, no. Here's what I would say: is that the Valar don't have the ability to change the fashion of the world, which means to change how the creation actually works, right? That's what Iluvatar is doing. That's what is happening here. He's actually changing the fashion of creation.
And why was that necessary here?
In order to separate, right? Essentially, well, let me find the quote here. The land of Aman and Erisea of the Eldar were taken away, removed beyond the reach of men forever. It's separating that part of the world from the world, right? The world was made round. It was like all ways are bent, I think is the way they put it. And that can only be done by Iluvatar. Like while the Valar can change the mountains, they can change the valleys, they can change the waterways. They can't change it's like changing physics. You can't do that if you're a Valar. You can't actually go in and change how the world works from sea to sky to stars. They can make small changes, but to actually change the fashion of it, to say like, no, we're creating this one path. Iluvatar has created this one path for the elves since they are connected to the world, to stay without the influence of men, without the evils of men coming over them anymore. That's what I took it as, not as a Iluvatar has come in and he's allowing Gandalf to come back. Like those are moments I think that Manwë may go back to Iluvatar and say, what are we doing here? In the same way that he did with Beren and Luthien, right? And the same way he did with creating the Ents and the Eagles.
Yes, it's interesting to me, because I agree with you that the Valar couldn't have done what Iluvatar did there. I utterly agree with that. I question, why was it necessary to do that? Could not the Valar have gone and chastised the Númenorians some other way and shocked them back into out of their evil? Or was there not another way for this? I agree. But within Tolkien's world, why is it? It's very interesting. I think this is the only time when Manwë calls upon Iluvatar. He doesn't seek to understand the mind of Iluvatar. He doesn't ask Iluvatar questions, because we've seen that before. Both of those things, where he tries to understand what Iluvatar's will is. He asks Iluvatar for questions. But here they're just like, "Hey, Iluvatar, you take it. Yeah, we don't have it anymore. We give up, and we actually give up our governorship, our government of Arda, for this time." And Iluvatar steps in and takes over the government of Arda. What's interesting to me is that if the government of Arda had to be given up in order for Iluvatar to do what he did, why doesn't now I'm doubting myself. Why couldn't the Valar have done the same thing? They were the ones that formed the continents in the first place with their song and during the song and the fashioning, the early era of the world where they were forming continents and things like that. They may not be able to have bend the world like that, maybe, but
that's what I think.
Okay, but they could have created a chasm and swallowed up Númenor.
I agree with that.
They had that power.
Yes. Yeah.
So you're saying they needed to do something totally different. Now I can argue for that position. I do think there's more to it than that. I can argue that, for example, the desire for men to escape death is well nigh insatiable. And so no matter what the Valar had done, the men were still going to try to seek the Blessed Land eventually. This might have created a cycle. So maybe that's the reason. It's a fascinating thing, especially in light of the incarnation, which Tolkien was a believer in. It's to connect this theologically. I know this is not part of the text, but I can't help it from a theology perspective. There's a connection, and you can see from Tolkien's perspective that the only thing that would draw men to God and have them come to view death as having no sting anymore, as the Bible says, would be God coming down and becoming them and showing them how this could be possible. No Valar on high from afar rather is going to be able to do that. So I could make that argument, but I was kind of curious what you guys thought of the giving up of the government of Arda thing.
Yeah, I think it's only for a time, and I think it's in order to change the shape of the world.
Okay.
He writes, the world was diminished, for Valinor and Erisea were taken from it into the realm of hidden things. And so the question will be, would the Valar be able to take part of the world into the realm of hidden things, since they are still attached to the world and of the world?
Well, and here's the interesting thing, right? It isn't just that it's like, oh, guess what? You can't sail to Valinor anymore. Or the world bends, and now and it's somewhere else, like out in space in another dimension, something like that. But the world diminishes because Valinor is not connected to it directly anymore. That's very interesting. Like there's a lot of blessings that were lost because of this, not just the island being lost and all the people. There's actual an effect on the world itself that goes beyond the physical things done by Iluvatar in this moment.
Yeah, I would say that I don't think it is a mark against the Valar. I don't think it's like the Valar failed. I think failure for the Valar is measured by faithfulness, and I think that they maintained their faithfulness. But I do think it is a mark of their insufficiency, that they are not Eru. They do not measure up to what he can do and what he is. And so I think that it is Tolkien showing the supremacy of the one God, that he changes the whole fashion of the world to forever separate the Valar and the Earth, and now the Earth is bent. And it just kind of seems like
bent in more ways than one. It's funny,
right?
that word bent is interesting in that regard. Yeah. I agree with you, Dan. I think that's good. I like that reading of it, and I also see it as the Valar could do pretty much anything within the confines of the world because they are governors of the world. But like you said, Jonathan, what they can't do is remake the world itself to be.
They can't redeem it.
Well, that's true too. But interestingly, the Iluvatar is not redeeming here; he's punishing and protecting the Blessed Land as well. But he's punishing the men for their sin. So this is definitely he's saving his people, the remnant, and then he's punishing the evildoers. So this is more of an Old Testament God in that sense.
Yeah. Now that I think about it, though, has the Valar ever killed any men or elves? Like I don't think they've ever. They got mad at the Noldor, huh?
Well, I have no way. There's no way they didn't kill men who fought for Morgoth. Like they came over with their armies and they were arrayed in battle. Okay, and they're like the whole continent was destroyed basically in this war. And all of the men were fighting except for some tiny portion, were fighting on the side of Morgoth. It was said so they definitely can kill men in battle.
But it seems like they've never killed men as a judgment, as a punishment, like as a legal declaration, like you must now die.
But and the Valar didn't. It was Iluvatar that did that because he's the one. Right. It was at that point that they gave up their ordering of the world, their governance, and Iluvatar destroyed the men. It wasn't their call.
I thought Dan was talking about something different than that.
Were you?
Maybe.
Well, I think the Valar, if I'm not mistaken, like I think they have killed men in battle, but I don't think they've ever had the right in and of themselves to declare judgment and decide life or death for men.
Even in the same way that Eonwë was hesitant to kill Maglor and Maedhros at the end. They didn't even want to excise or execute them.
It's like, yeah, they deserve it, but we're not going to do it because it's almost like it's not up to them.
Yeah.
All right. Question number 2. Is there something in men, especially in the Dunedain, that belongs in the Blessed Lands? Quote, for the Dunedain held that even mortal men, if so blessed, might look upon other times than those of their body's life, and they longed ever to escape from the shadows of their exile and to see in some fashion the light that dies not. For the sorrow of the thought of death had pursued them over the deeps of the sea. So this is following, of course, the fall and destruction of Númenor. And it's talking about the Dunedain now, who are the only Númenorians that are left. They are literally the faithful. And so I feel like maybe there's something in the line of the Númenorians because of their elvish heritage, even though they've chosen immortal life, which draws them back to the Blessed Land. I think it was almost like catnip for them. They almost couldn't help themselves. They needed to see that light. And even after the destruction of Númenor, even after the bending of the world, the Dunedain still have in them that they have this great sorrow of the thought of death, and they had longed ever to escape and to see in some fashion the light that dies not.
Yeah, it's kind of like it's like being a junkie, right? You can't you still.
But for something good, crystal meth destroys you.
Right? No. I know that's what my point is. That it's like there's a part of them that just is like I just long for that. Like I can't. I just want a little hit of the light of the trees. Of what's left?
A 2 trees junkie.
I mean, that's what you think, right? They would 2 trees junkie. That's what they would do even before Númenor fell down, right? They wanted to. The faithful still wanted to glimpse. They would sail out into their masts at the top in the hopes of like seeing that.
They like take these great sea voyages just for the off chance that they might glimpse the mountain. Which has reflected light from the light of Valinor, not even the light of Valinor. Real thing.
And the Valar make the point: you see this light, you're going to die faster. You're going to burn out.
You're going to burn out.
In the same way that if you're smoking crystal meth every once in a while, you're going to probably burn out pretty fast too. So really, the 2 trees, that's just the start of the Portland of Middle Earth.
So all those Frodo lives vandals in the 60s were right. This is all just a drug metaphor.
That's right.
Oh man,
where have we gone?
So was your question? Was your question that there was something in like the ontology of men that they are meant to desire?
The high men of the Númenor of the men descended from Elros. Because here's the thing. It seems
there's something
like
built into them.
Yep, and even you see it in Faramir, and even you see it in Aragorn. This sorrow. There's kind of a sadness about the world. And they desire this light, and Tolkien says it directly. To me, that's immensely tragic because it's almost like these are the men who reached the heights and pinnacles of what men could be in terms of craft and power, wisdom, and actual wisdom, bliss, knowledge. They had it all, and they're just they yearn for the thing that they can't have. They yearn for the escape from death and the light that does not die, and so. That's tragic. Like the lower men don't have that desire for the light that cannot die. They don't have it in them the way the Númenorians do anyway, and the Dunedain.
So the question is, go ahead, Dan.
Is that like that C.S. Lewis quote where he says, if I find in myself a desire that nothing in this world satisfies, that means I was probably made for another world? There's something in the Númenorians where we're built. We're made for something else, and we don't have it right now. So we don't have it on this side of death.
Augustine, our hearts are restless until they rest in thee.
Yes, yeah. Or perhaps this, like there's another approach to the question: is it perhaps because they have seen the tree that they long for it, rather than being a part of their heritage? Have they seen the light in the same way that once someone sees the Silmaril, unless you're strong enough, right? You like Thingol, right? He desired it so greatly that he was willing to die for it, right? Because he desired the light. The light had a grip on them because they weren't strong enough. In the same way that Galadriel eventually she passed the test, honestly, not for the ring, not for power, but that's what the Silmarils were. They were like even a symbol of power for those that wanted it, right? The greatest.
Well, that is fascinating. That's great, Jonathan. I like really fascinated because the Silmarils are not the ring. They're not evil. They are good. They are actually good and beautiful and were blessed objects. They're sanctified, in fact, is the word that Tolkien uses by Varda. And so they're made holy. So, and yet all the children of Iluvatar who, well, not all of them, Beren doesn't. But besides Beren and a handful of other people, everyone wants to possess them and to their ruin mostly.
Yeah.
And so it's fascinating that even the good and the beautiful can be, for Tolkien, can become this source of your destruction because you want what you should not want.
And that's how Tolkien ends this chapter too, where in this sort of epilogue to the Akallabêth, he writes, "And tales and rumors arose along the shores of the sea concerning mariners, and men forlorn upon the water, who by some fate or grace or favor of the Valar had entered in upon the straight way and seen the face of the world sink below them," because that's what Iluvatar did. He changed the fashion of the earth. "And so had come to the lamplit quays of Avalone, or verily to the last beaches on the margin of Aman, and there had looked upon the white mountain, dreadful and beautiful, before they died." So it's essentially, it's like stepping into the flame. Like I see it at the very end, and then I'm gone. I cannot.
You can't bear it.
This light, this power, my mortal body can't bear it, and so I may witness it, but then I just perish in the witnessing of it.
I like it.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, I think men are not made to witness that kind of beauty and power, right? It is like the elves are the ultimate. I think Tolkien, I don't remember where he wrote this, but they're the ultimate version of what artistry is on Earth, right? They are able to create the greatest art, right? Their power is essentially a part of them, and their artistry, their ability to create the most beautiful things that are a part of this world, because they are attached to this world. Their souls, their bodies are attached to this world. It gives them something that men could never have. And so when men witness the ultimate version of that, where they took the light of the trees, still we have the tree upon Tuna that is there, but witnessing that is just too great for them, right? Yeah, it's overwhelming.
Yeah, and tragic. It's a sadness, because it isn't that they want something evil; they want something good.
And no man ever holds a Silmaril, right? Only the elves ever do.
Well, Beren does.
Well, Beren does. You're right.
Gets his hand bit off.
Yep. Okay. And that's it. Yeah.
And we talked about that. How the Silmaril seems to withhold its natural effect from Beren and doesn't burn his hand.
Right.
When he takes a hold of it, which seems to imply the Silmaril doing something, which is interesting. But
it goes back to the whole anthropomorphic aspect of some of the artistic creations in Middle-earth. Man, here's one other thing I wanted to say. Sauron reminds me a little bit of Screwtape. Because everything he does, he's like, he knows, like, what is it? Screwtape writes in the Screwtape Letters by C.S. Lewis, something about like, half religion is as good as no religion. Like if we can just sort of like, lead them astray a little bit, then they'll eventually fall into that chasm that is Valar. Anyway, but yeah, so like he reminds me, like he does everything sort of just pushes them a little bit so that they start seeing that. Like he says, what is it? The darkness, right? And still, if they should come at last to the end of those lands and seas beyond all, this is what Sauron says, beyond all lay the ancient darkness, and out of it the world was made. For darkness alone is worshipful, right? Because out of it the world was made, and the Lord thereof may yet make other worlds, the Lord of darkness, to be gifts to those that serve him, and so that the increase of their power shall find no end. And so he pushes them, he makes these things, he convinces them of small truths wrapped in greater lies, and they fall for that. And so
as men ever have.
Yes, yeah, true. Right. He's unable, is he able to do that to the not even to Feanor's children does Morgoth ever sway them to his side? Are there Maglor, other than Maeglin? right? Who works essentially for Morgoth once he's captured. Is it Maeglin? Am I remembering that right? And Gondolin?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. The names always, man. Maglor, Maeglin, Maedhros. I just start losing it with all that. Anyway.
Yeah, there are very few elves that there would be no way that this is a parallel. If an elf king was so stupid as to take Sauron prisoner, he wouldn't have been able to convince a bunch of elves to turn to sacrifice of people, elf sacrifice or human sacrifice or whatever. He wouldn't have been able to convince them to worship Morgoth instead of Eru. They're like, there's no way that that's believable. And elves are too tied to the goodness of the world. So Min, and we have a lot about that earlier in the Silmarillion, where Morgoth daunts Min easily, and he leads them and forms their societies, and Sauron does the same thing. So, So in 2 chapters, the rise and fall of
and we would be
the greatest human civilization.
Like we have to talk, and we will in the extended podcast talk a little bit more about all the questions that we got about freedom and Melkor Morgoth in his final form, or so to speak, and how many generations of Ents there were, but also what do we make of this in the Rings of Power? Because now that we've read through Akallabêth, obviously in the Rings of Power, they still don't have the license to this, but this is an expansion of what are in the appendices to the Return of the King.
Right.
So when they can't, like we mentioned last week, they can't even get the motivation of the Númenorians right? They could point towards that more in the second season, but certainly they missed it in the first. And if you're going to make any point about the Númenorians and their motivations, that would be the point to have fun.
Well, they did. They have plenty of motivations. Númenorians are scared of people taking their gerbs, and they're really careful about the 3 ships that they own to make sure that they don't.
But so
our Pharazôn is like, we need to build a wall, a great wall, keep out all the elves.
The greatest wall.
Yeah. Oh man. If we, it's like I don't even know where to start anymore. Like talking about this, what is the one thing, like after reading through this, that you might take away and say like, okay, here's where the Rings of Power got it right.
The wall of water.
The one wall of water. Yeah, was that like episode 4 or something? When she was when she was holding a Palantir. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the wall of water.
They got the part
right. However, they got it wrong that Galadriel was seeing that.
Oh yeah, well, of course. Like all the details are going to get wrong. You just asked me for one thing. Palantir himself, the fact that they had Palantir and that he was intimated to be a friend of the elves and returning to the old ways. I mean, there's some vague references that are kind of right. It's just a series of missed promise. There's so much that I would have loved to have been so excited by this series, because there's the Númenorian story is so powerful and could be so rich, and they could fill it out, because of course what Tolkien gives us is only a sketch. There's here in the Silmarillion, there's only 1 chapter about it, and then there's other stuff that we know from his from the Fall of Númenor, the book collection, and others, and some from his letters. But it's so rich, and they missed the central theme. That's what I don't even get. I do not understand that. How do you miss putting in? It doesn't even take any talent. The entire driving purpose of the downfall of Númenor and who they were as a people was centered around their fear of death and their desire for the light of the blessed land and to be able to sail there. That's what they wanted.
Yeah, I will say the one thing they got right was that Sauron was guileful.
All right.
That's about as close as I can get, right?
Yeah, I don't think that they can tell that story though, Michael, because I think they don't understand that being a bad thing. They don't understand. It's like back in Genesis in the garden, we shall be like God. they don't have a problem with that. And so to have
right.
to have that be
That's
the bad
fair.
thing that brings them down, they wouldn't get it.
They're like, we disagree with that the Númenorians were actually making a bad decision when they decided to take on the Valar in the Undying Lands.
So yet another example then of the story that they think Tolkien should have wrote. And they decided to write it instead.
We want to be right next to him on the bookshelf with a story that he never wrote. But in fact, what they're doing is they're retelling the story that he already wrote, just doing it incredibly poorly. This is what I don't get. Anyway, okay. So we're gonna jump into our extended podcast. We're gonna do a little bit more, and we're gonna talk about this here, which, in case you missed it, it was an announcement made.
I'm very excited for this upcoming series.
Shelob will
Young
be
Shelob.
in season 2 of The Rings of Power, and I'm sure we'll find out about her daddy issues too. So her, it's kind of his. Anyway, you're looking at if you're listening, this is a picture, a poster of the upcoming series, Young Shelob, riffing off of the Young Sheldon series, and it's an image of a six-legged spider that was generated with AI. Anyway, I think it looks pretty good.
Amazing. I want to print this out and put it up on my wall.
It's pretty high quality. I mean, I can zoom in pretty far, and you can, it's not too bad.
Yeah.
You could probably get a good 24 by 16 on that. Anyway,
whoa, what an image to finish our podcast on.
Picture Young Shelob coming at you, season 2, The Rings of Power. You excited? I'm excited. Whoop whoop.
Super excited.
Yeah, this is going to be awesome. But guys, I can't wait until we see Shelob. And the funny thing is like you said, it's all member berries. So we're going to talk about that extended podcast. We're going to talk about the questions that Naya and Harrison and AJ have submitted. I got to say too, like Harrison and AJ, they have really stepped up some of the conversation lately, and like going back and forth about greed and motivation and deathlessness. Like it's a deep conversation, and I'm hesitant to step into that because they're showing their true colors, and they're pretty good.
This is cool.
Anyway, so if you want to join us in our Discord conversations to get our extended podcasts where we answer and we talk about, and sometimes we don't answer, we just talk about to kind of hopefully spur other thoughts in our extended podcast, go to thewarning.com/member, become a member there, and if you don't like it, you can cancel within the first month, and you never pay a thing. So we'll head off unless there are any final thoughts about the Second Age, because we are now going to get into Of the Rings of Power and the Third Age in the next
Finally, we get to talk about the Rings of Power, because we haven't talked about that at all.
Oh, not at all. We talk about the real Rings of Power that are forged in the proper fashion, in the proper process. We'll get probably two episodes on that, but first next week we're going to do our special confessions from the comfy chair, our Torque Inquisition of each other. For everybody to listen to.
I love Inquisitions. I'm Catholic.
And we love posting questions on doors as Protestants. Post the questions, and you can anyway.
You post the questions. We'll ask you the questions later.
Yeah. I guess they're not questions; they're theses. But we'll call this the Torque. Anyway, I'm going to stop now. We'll move on to our extended podcast. Good seeing y'all. See you next week.
All right. See you guys.
Bye, freeloaders.